Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Gun. I'm attorney Louis Myers, Jr. I'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
There are two types of people in this world. Those who are inspired and those who inspire. Those who constantly long for and those who acquire. No idea is original, yes, there's truth in this, but the person who has the strength to implement the idea always is. Because there are those who have dreams and chase them, but those who sleep waiting to be awakened, unaware that we can make a difference in our existence through hard work, resilience, and persistence. Because a man that wishes to move mountains must realize that he must first start by shoveling pebbles from its base, and be aware that no matter how long it takes, a man can move mountains. And most of you will think this is just a saying, and the majority won't believe me, but when you get a couple minutes on your PC, Google Dasharaf Manjihi, because a man can move mountains. Success is a ladder, and only few of us will find it. Even less of us will have the strength to climb it, afraid of the prospect of spending your whole life climbing. But just remember that no matter what route you take, it's always up to you to decide it. Don't let your success define you, let your success be defining. Have you seen that picture on Facebook of the guy that's mining? Why give up when you're this close to the diamond? Because people that change the world do not let the world change them. Because there are two types of people in this world. Those who are amazed and those who are amazing. So which one are you?
This is Louis Myers. I'm happy to welcome you to another program of Beyond the Gun. Today we have a very special topic that we're going to be discussing, one in which every American should be concerned about, domestic violence. I am very delighted to have a panel of women today on the program who work in the domestic violence area and who have worked with victims of domestic violence for a number of years. Let me start by introducing Joyce Coffey, the head of the Family Rescue Corporation here in the city of Chicago. And I have had the privilege of working with Joyce for a number of months, if not almost 1 or 2 years. She's doing a marvelous job. Next is Sylvia Pullum, who works also with Family Rescue. And you're going to learn more about what she does today with Family Rescue. And then Cherie Jones, and you have a very special role in the Family Rescue program because you deal with the victims, the children, and the individuals who really, even more than the actual victims, suffer the most. I am delighted to have each of you here today. And Joyce, you're the CEO, so we're going to start out. Tell the audience a little bit about what is domestic violence, why is that so important, and we know it's Domestic Violence Month.
Well, it's good that you asked me that question because a lot of times people have very different opinions as to what domestic violence is. In a nutshell, domestic violence is a series of coercive behaviors that one individual inflicts on another for the purposes of power and control. And these relationships are defined in law here in Illinois by the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. And basically, it's a relationship between people who are related by marriage, or dating, or by blood, or by having children, or allegedly having children in common, or having been in a dating relationship. And it also includes individuals who have various disabilities and their personal assistance.
Let's go back just for one moment so the audience will be, what do you mean by coercive relationship? That's a big term. And so we got people, men and women, listening out there. So what is that? So tell us what that is. And so everybody will be clear about what's a coercive relationship.
Okay. Well, back in the day, Lou, there were situations where we talked about rape, for instance, as being a crime of passion. Oh, people are just overcome in the moment. Well, we know that domestic violence is not like that. And even in sexual relationships, that's not true. When we talk about power and control, we're talking about behaviors that somebody inflicts on another person on purpose for the purpose of controlling them. So for instance, denigrating, calling you out of your name. You're so stupid. You know, nobody is going to want you. You're too fat. You're too skinny. Your hair is too short, too long. You can't cook. Whatever the issues are, but nobody else is going to want you other than me.
But it's a relationship involving, at the end of the day, violence.
It involves violence, but not
violence
always
could take
physical.
Violence, you know, takes on two characters. There's the physical violence. I'm getting ready to hit you upside your head, and that is the language that people use to denigrate each other that can be as deadly as the physical violence. So it involves an abusive relationship where one party abuses either by physical force or by verbal impact,
Yes.
the dignity and integrity of another.
It can be emotional, it can be psychological, it can be financial abuse, it's stalking. And of course, what we think of very often, of course, is the physical abuse. We think about that. But all of these forms of violence that are used in conjunction with one another form a trap for victims, and it is very difficult to break out of those relationships. Yes.
Okay, now, tell us what your program does. You have two wonderful representatives here today, and I want them to tell what specifically they do, but give us an overview of what your operation handles every day, and what's your objectives?
So Family Rescue is an organization that has been providing services to the Chicago community for 36 years now. And we operate 4 programs that provide services to victims of domestic violence. Our flagship program is our shelter that assists victims who are fleeing domestic violence relationships. That program is a program that helps women, children, and victims can also be men, but helps them first gain stability, gain insight into the various types of violence that they have been subjected to, and to begin planning for what their next steps are, whatever that might be. Our second program that we opened was our community outreach program. And this was a program for victims who did not need shelter, or perhaps the shelters were full, but they definitely needed counseling and advocacy and support. And that program is a program that helps not only victims who are out of their violent relationships, but oftentimes for victims who are still within those relationships. Our third program is our transitional housing program, which is a 24-month program that assists victims with children, providing them with subsidized housing, and again, all the wraparound services and supports, giving the head of household, the victim, a chance to come up with a plan that moved them from homelessness to financial and emotional stability. And our last program is our legal advocacy program that assists victims in obtaining orders of protection in criminal and/or civil court. And it also has 2 very special units that we call our domestic violence reduction units. And Family Rescue is the only agency, domestic violence agency in Chicago, that has offices in police stations. So last year when we were here talking with you, we were in 3rd District, but we are also now in Area South, which is 4th District and 5th. So
now, before we go to Sylvia and Cherie, tell us briefly, how did you get involved in this? What keeps you going? What motivated you to spend the last 36 years or working over a number of years with this problem?
I think in my deepmost, innermost soul, I am an advocate for the underdog. I'm always wanting and have always wanted to help those who are vulnerable and those who are hurting. And I came into this work kind of accidentally. I moved to the Chicago area, and the founder of Family Rescue, Gay Northrop, was looking for a director of the shelter, which was the only program that Family Rescue had at the time. And I didn't know anything about domestic violence, so I went to the library and I got this book called Scream Quietly or Your Neighbors Might Hear, written by a woman by the name of Erin Pizzi. And she had opened domestic violence shelters in England. So I read up on it, came into the interview, and asked me that same question. And I told her, well, you know, I read this book, and I told her the book, and she just started smiling. Unbeknownst to me, when Gay was conceptualizing Family Rescue, she traveled to England and she worked with Erin for a year.
Small world, isn't it?
Small world. Worked with Erin for a year and came back and then founded Family Rescue. So I went to the library and got the right book.
Got the right book. You know, being a professor, I understand what it means by getting the right book.
Yes.
Cherie.
Cherie.
Look, tell me, you have a particular role that you play at Family Rescue.
Yes.
And you were telling me off camera what it was, and I was so touched by it. Why don't you tell us what you do?
I work with the women and children, specifically the children who have been impacted by domestic violence.
What's the age range of these kids?
The age range can be from infancy all the way up to 18, 21 that we work with. And working with the children as they come into our program is very important because they deserve the same level of care that
these are children who have been in homes where there have been domestic violence and abusive relationships. They've seen their mothers, their fathers, their mothers' boyfriends, their boyfriends, girlfriends. They've seen these things play out in front of them. Is that right?
That is very true. They come from homes where they are surrounded by domestic violence, whether it's arguing or fighting, where they see them, they become confused and understanding of what to do, how to interact. You find that children who are impacted by domestic violence, they try to intervene. They try to help the family, the mom, the dad, to not to fight, not to argue. They become nervous and afraid, so they don't know what to do. And when they come to us, it's our job to help them work through those feelings and issues so they can understand that first, domestic violence is not their fault. A lot of children come with us thinking that it's their fault, that they've had to be relocated from their home for what they know, or the stability of having a family, going to the same school, having friends. They're totally disassociated from all of that. So it's our job to help them find stability, find understanding, find ways to have a sense of normalcy, and that's what the program does for us.
Do you give them, do you provide psychological counseling or social counseling? Do they go through sessions? What is it when you find a kid who's in that kind of environment and he or she comes to you? Where do you take them? Do you say, let's go to the church or let's go to the counselor or what?
No, they come into our shelter. Our shelter offers comprehensive children's services. So when they come into our shelter, they are assigned a counselor. We show them love, we show them support, we show them that stability, we give them the opportunity to talk. So they come in, they're assigned a counselor, they sit and they talk with us. We're able to help them with their social, emotional, and some have behavior issues. So we have a very comprehensive staff that's able to meet them on every level that they need the services that we're able to provide.
One question I have, I am told that these types of problems, kids coming in, let's say they start out in an environment when they're 9 or 10, it tends to carry with them for the rest of their lives, some of them. Sometimes this has a profound effect on the developing of their character, of their emotional well-being. Tell me a little bit about how do you deal with that? Is that a real problem?
It's definitely a real problem. It's one that we have to address every day. So the importance is to bring the family together, to work with the mom. You can work with the child, but if you don't work with the family as a unit, then you're going to find that our children are going to continue to carry these problems on with them. And so it's really important to work with the mom to get her to understand first her own issues and the dynamics of domestic violence and how what she has gone through affects her children, and get them to work together as a unit, get her to understand the impact that it has on her children, get her to understand to listen to her children, to understand that her children have feelings and that what has happened has impacted them, and for them to be verbal and expressive and work together as a family. And what we've seen over time is that when we have worked with the family and they have continually worked through the program, that you find less children that when they leave the program that are a part of the cycle, that are able to go into homes and not have to deal with the domestic violence as a whole, as a family.
Sylvia, you know, I was particularly interested in the conversation that we had about your particular background, which is unique of sorts. And I want you to kind of explain the situation, how you got involved in this domestic violence problem, and how that led to incarceration. And now you are Dr. Sylvia Pullum. That's important because you're at the one stage of it and you started out at another stage of it, and now you're out in the world an advocate for the rights of the human dignity of women. Give us a little background and then we'll come back to George Coffey.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I happen to be one of those children that Charmy talked about. From the age of 3, watching my mother for some, I would say 30 plus years, be abused psychologically, mentally, physically, sexually, financially. All of the legs of domestic violence. And as a child, I also remember saying that when I got older and began to date that I wouldn't allow a boy / a man to abuse me. But as we know, the cycle permeates, it perpetrates itself. And so I can honestly say throughout the years, physically abused elements of witnessing that turned me and shaped me into that.
In your own home.
In the home
with your own mom.
With my own mom. And then when I began to date physically, and to the point where I got to the point where I thought that if I could change the person, I wouldn't be abused. And so years down the line, I dated a Chicago police officer, and for almost 4.5 years. And so because he wasn't physically aggressive, I thought that I had the perfect man, but he was psychologically and emotionally abusive. And one night of dysfunction landed me in prison.
Now, and a lot of people would say, well, wait a minute, how do we go from him not going to prison? Because normally the abuser is male. Yeah. Well, in more cases than many. But in this situation, you who were, from what I've talked to you about, you were a victim, but you were subsequently arrested and prosecuted?
Yeah, let me just state that he was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Okay. Years of domestic violence going unchecked, not having the counseling such as family rescue offers, because we were told what stayed in the home, what happened in the home rather stayed in the home, sort of like Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so I didn't know that domestic violence was abnormal. What happened there was abnormal for me. So one particular night of going to prison based on me deciding that I was no longer going to be abused psychologically, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially. So he happened to be the one that took the brunt of everything based on psychological and emotional abuse.
Right. And that's something that now it has not become a real, quote, real defense in criminal cases. Across the country, more and more jurisdictions, Joyce, are acknowledging that when, particularly in criminal cases, that a human being, a woman can be pushed to the point, where she snaps, and in some jurisdictions in the country, that is allowable as a defense in a criminal case. But let me tell you what I was so impressed about, is that after you, went into the system and came out, and you told me even while you were in the system, you had made up your mind you were going to work in the area of domestic violence abuse. Yes. Tell us what brought you out of the prison system into the world, and now you're Dr. Sylvia Pullum.
Well, let me say while I was there, I had my aha moment. You can have an epiphany to the point where you realize that you need to break the cycle. And after talking to my mother and finding out that I was the 4th generation who had suffered domestic violence, I was determined to be the one to stop the violence. And so I began to educate myself, reading a lot of self-help books. You talked about those books earlier. Reading self-help books. I had individuals who reached out to me while in prison, who helped walk me through the journey. And then I knew I had children who I had left back at home who needed to know that this was not the way to go and that their mother could be, as I say, reinvented. And so one thing about it as well, I educated myself in prison. I knew that I was a paralegal because when I went in, I had my paralegal degree, but I didn't know I was a writer. So I began to write books, nonfiction books about my life, journaling what I went through and how I wanted to come out. And so educating myself and finding out that the prisoner could go to school for free. I got enrolled in a Bible seminary college there, went from my bachelor's to my master's, and then decided to keep going. But also there, I was allowed to help offenders in the penal institution.
I think that's a marvelous story, because when you get out, you came back into your community, and you're working along with Family Rescue.
Yes.
And she's doing many of the things, Sister Jones, that you talked about. You're counseling kids. She's saying she wished she could have had you
yes.
with her, and maybe things in life would have been different. But God works in mysterious ways. Mm-hmm. You know, you went through that experience and you've come out, and now what specifically do you do with Family Research?
Well, I started out as coming
Family
to
Rescue, I'm sorry.
Family Rescue as a court advocate. And so because of the paralegal degree and having a passion to help women in domestic violence. And from that point on, we recognized that I had a lot more that I could offer as far as gaining resources. I'm a resource queen. And so I knew that just offering an order of protection wasn't enough, because at one time in that relationship, I also wrote out orders of protection. So it was so easy to get an order of protection written out and for me to drop it. And so I knew that I had to get to the root of a thing. So I was determined, and after collaborating with my supervisor at that time, that outreach department of Family Rescue would be more suitable for me to be utilized and use my skill set there.
Joyce, man, these are two marvelous examples of the success of your operation. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the order of protection. Let's talk about what women, and I'm using women now, what can they do in abusive relationships? What does the law provide? I mean, do they file for orders of protection, which could be a civil remedy? Can they file a criminal complaint? What are some of the options?
So they can do either or. For those women who want to press criminal charges against their abuser, then the criminal route is the way to go. But sometimes that isn't what the victim feels would be best for her family in that particular situation. They may be reluctant to pull their perpetrator into court, especially in the African American community. That's true. Victims do not want their significant others to have, police records or that kind of thing. So they can also get an order of protection in civil court. It doesn't matter. Both of those
Tell the
orders.
audience what an order of protection in civil court means.
In civil court it means that you're getting this protective order, but you have not filed criminal charges against the person. But you're saying this person has done, and then whatever the activities are, has done these things, and so you can get an order without an underlying criminal charge. And so that works out well. So an order of protection, many times people say restraining orders, but that's not what it is. It's a specific order that relates to your husband, your boyfriend, etc. Could be another family member. And it has all sorts of wonderful remedies in it. You can get exclusive possession of your home. You can get physical custody of your children. You can get cease and desist. You don't even have to leave the abusive relationship. You can remain there, but that order says that you cannot perpetrate these types of behaviors against the person.
You just touched on something. So a woman goes down and says, I want an order of protection. And that's because, I've heard some of these stories, that's because the man has beat them up, and sometimes they sent him to the hospital, broke bones, and done all these horrible things. And then 5 weeks later, she's back in a relationship with the man that she just got to order of protection against, who just physically abused her more often than not in front of her children, right? What would make her want to go back into the environment that she's going to court to ask for protection from?
Let me ask you this question.
Uh-oh. Right.
Before
you ask me, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to wrap it down, and we're going to come back, because I know that that's going to elicit a real answer from me. Thank you. Beyond the Gun, we'll be right back.
I've been told that Black women aren't supposed to support the Second Amendment. I've been told I shouldn't want to be able to protect myself. I shouldn't teach my fellow students about their rights, and I shouldn't speak my mind. Thank God I didn't listen. To all of those who have called me a sellout, an Uncle Tom, or a pawn for someone else, here's what should scare you. I never changed my beliefs. I woke up and realized that you don't represent them. You don't speak for me, and you don't think for me. I am not the victim you need me to be. And I'm talking to more women like me every single day. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Why do they stay?
Well, they stay for a number of reasons. One of them is that women stay in abusive relationships not because they like being beat, but they stay in spite of the fact because they love that person. They stay out of fear. Women are not going to have 24-hour police protection. I'm going to go home at the end of the day. So is Sylvia and so is Charmy. What happens when the police protection is gone? What happens when you're out of the counseling relationship? They stay out of fear. They stay because there's a certain level of financial dependency. You need to live. Your children need to live. They stay because they believe that it's important that their children have their mother and their father. Domestic violence is a messy business. It's not cut and dried. We know from research that victims leave relationships up to 7 times before they make a determination that enough is enough and I have to go. And so I'm always amazed that the question that's asked is, why does she stay? But for those who are out there who are in domestic violence relationships, there is a number that you can call from Family Rescue. That number is area code 773-375-8400.
One more time.
773-375-8400. If you need help, if you need to talk, you can get assistance 24/7 at that number.
You know, and you wanted to say, Sylvia, you had mentioned something when I raised the issue about why do they stay. You had some ideas on that.
Well, I talked about it. It's likened to the first time that a drug addict takes a hit. They're looking for that high, that love, that beautiful man that they met that used to woo them. And likewise for men who met women. Also, the fact that sometimes the classical conditioning, likened to Pavlov's dogs. They've been so conditioned to engage in hopelessness that when the time comes to leave, they don't leave.
Sister Jones, does any of the children that you work with ever ask you, why is my mommy still taking that?
We get that question. They want to know why they stay, why didn't they leave sooner? And we have to explain to them in the best way that we can that it's not mommy's fault.